But this is our little fun ritual. Okay. We're really lucky to have like all this storage. This one is, again, like dad life.
I wanted to go deeper into learning how e-bikes are changing families' lives in New York. So we asked Cornelius if we can hang with him for the day in Brooklyn.
What's that, baby? All right, can you open the door for me?
He has 2 daughters, and we got to join them for drop-off, and we had some really interesting conversations.
Thank you.
Cornelius is an educator, and I really enjoyed learning from him about the importance of literary infrastructure. We talk a lot about physical infrastructure, but I'm reminded that this is just a small part of a healthy and nurturing city. It was really inspiring to learn about how he helps others and to see what's possible by drawing connections to real-life experiences.
Thank you. Okay, here. There you go. And then there. Okay. Babies, I love you. Right? The big part, the tough part, is like getting all the logistics to get them here. But once I get here, my morning is easy.
Good.
Yeah.
Just dropped Cornelius's kids off at school. It's cool to see all the different parents and the different modes they take and stuff like that.
It's one of the most, I think, amazing parts of New York City. You see every kind of kid, every kind of parent, every kind of relationship. It's one of my favorite moments to see that and dismissal, to see like how kids like greet their parents, like what like breakfast feels like for kids, you know, like all of that is just like really exciting. But I've always felt like you don't really know a city until you know the kids of the city. And when you see how a city treats its youngest and most vulnerable, that's what a city really is. You can be a great city for the Wall Streeters, you can be a great city for the business owners, but if the kids aren't having a great experience, that says a lot about a city.
What are some of those touch points that you see as being particularly important for those details?
How easy is it for a family to like get their kids to a really good school? How easy is it for a family to get really nutritious food? How easy is it for a family to like have access to a really great library?
What cities prioritize and stuff like that. It's interesting to hear from your perspective as both an educator and a father, you know, living in Brooklyn.
The work that I do is through our own independent consulting firm. I write for a publisher. I'm mainly interested in literacy as a tool for like social advancement, that we don't read and write just for academics. So you have literacy so that democracy can work. You can't have an operational democracy without people who can read, write, and think.
Yeah, I mean, because you can't really adequately vote or participate in the process, or really participate in your community on the same level.
And so when people talk about wanting a powerful democracy, if everybody can't read and think and analyze and make decisions, then it weakens democracy.
In a similar fashion, we think about infrastructure, right? Yeah. You're kind of talking about infrastructure in a different type of way in the education system, in our built environment, access to libraries and different things like that, and how critical that is to actually move people along, like help people uplift themselves and that sort of thing. You know, I think about bike infrastructure and people's ability to do that.
And they're very related. You know, I think all the time about just the fact that I can bike my kids anywhere in the city. My kids have access to every museum.
Not just the ones the subway goes to.
Exactly. And I don't own a car, but they get to see all this stuff, you know. Even just like the idea of the natural beauty of New York City, and that's not a term that people use often. They don't see the city through a car window, they see the city from like a human's eye view. So we make eye contact with the crossing guard, we get to say good morning to the person at the food cart. I think all of those things are really important. Like, it's not just transportation, again, it's social literacy.
I'm reminded through this conversation how it's the small interactions and moments that really shape us. One of the things I personally really love about being in the city is the abundance of these opportunities, and the bike just opens that up even more. He had some really interesting thoughts about access to other resources, especially for kids.
One of the things that I've been really active on, for example, is like childhood literacy. They say that you should read to your kids every night. So that's $17 a night for a little kid to get like a picture book or a board book. If your family doesn't have $17 a night, like how close are you to a library? You know, so those little things aren't just quality of life issues, they're like social literacy issues. If your family's a mile and a half away from a decent library with good books.
I say it is a mile and a half, and the only way to get there is an automobile or something like that. It might further put somebody in a economic jam. I mean, think about it.
My oldest daughter, we use the library every Saturday, and we get about 9 books every Saturday. And like that's a great social benefit for her. She's a great reader. She enjoys looking at pictures and looking at books. But that's 9 books a week that we couldn't afford. You know, one of the things that I appreciate is letting her take the initiative. So like I'll walk with her, but she'll take all the turns, like she navigates the way. Because she's learning how to, navigate Brooklyn. Pretty soon she's going to be doing that completely on her own to school and back. But again, that's a huge benefit. So when I think about how cities are built and like everybody thinks about like physical infrastructure, I'm often thinking about social or developmental infrastructure.
As a teacher, I wonder what he thought it would take to educate more people about the power of bikes.
I taught for a long, long time, and so I would park the bike outside of school so kids would see me locking it up and they're like, oh cool, you got a bike. People started asking me questions about it. They're like, well, I want to learn how to ride a bike. And so I figured out that there are some city kids who don't know how to ride bikes. Kids would like bring their bikes over, and so it became like this thing, a conversation piece where we talked about, well, why don't you have a car, sir? And I would explain to people, I was like, well, let me talk to you about emissions and let me talk to you about, people are really stuck on comfort and they're stuck on the things that are easiest, which might not be best. That explains our addiction to fossil fuels, addiction to processed foods, which we know aren't good for us. One of the things that has been really important for me is almost everything that I have learned, I've learned it because I've been in close proximity to people who know that thing or value that thing. Hanging out with other people who ride bikes taught me a lot about how I want to move around the city. Hanging out with people who decided to feed their family healthier meals helped me to kind of like learn how to cook that way. And so I think the solution for these transportation things is to like be in proximity with other people. And so like conversations like this one, or I was at the grocery store the other day and I was putting the groceries in the front of the bike and somebody just stopped and they're like, hey, so you bring this and you get your groceries? And I was like, yeah. Or like, today when we're on the way to school, the guy asked me, he's like, hey, it's a cool bike. And so, but it's those interactions that give people the idea.
So in some ways, we need the early adopters. We need the ones that are out there first, like being an example for others. What sort of thoughts do your kids seem to have about your bike?
The biggest question is always, what can we do next? They think it's fun. I'm doing the Empire State Trail this summer, Brooklyn to Canada. And the first question for my kids they're like, well, you can do it on the cargo bike so we can go? I was gonna do it by myself, on a road bike. But as soon as I floated the idea, the kids were like,
so wait, what?
Yeah, like they were just like, so we're missing out on a road trip because you're being selfish. And you want to go with your road bike. The question for them is always just like, how can we use this bike to do something even cooler? We had a fun challenge this winter when it was like cold out. We tried to do every bridge in the city. And so we did every bridge in this city except for the Verrazano.
I think it's great that he's able to expose his kids to this. I don't know if I'd be into bikes or doing what I'm doing today if I didn't have my dad to teach me about them at an early age. I know I learn well from others, and this reminds me that even just riding a bike can be a form of teaching others what's possible.
One of the things that they ask all the time is, are we gonna be able to ride it? And I'm like, oh, you're not strong enough yet, but right. I know my oldest is like, yeah, I can get 2 friends on the back of it, and I'm like, no, not yet.
Speaking about this idea of like kids growing up and they're like, have this aspiration of owning a car one day. And it's like now like kids growing up and they're like, I don't want that. And then also potentially to get to the point where they're actually educated to the point to recognize that might in some ways be some form of like economic enslavement that they might not want to sign up for.
And we have conversations, like they were a part of the conversation where we were like, a car is not wise for our family. If we have a car and if we drive the car every day, we're gonna miss out on swimming because like we can't pay for gas and your swim lessons. If we have a car and we drive a car every day, you're gonna miss out on like trips that we can't drive a car every day and then go on family trips. They were sitting at the desk when Bashir rung up the bike, and when we paid for it, they were like, well, that's a lot of money, Dad. Like, we're about to pay for this like bike. But then we shared with them like how the bike has already paid for itself. We haven't even owned it for a year. And we've already gotten that money back. And so we're able to show them that like, yeah, driving a car every day would cost our family this much, and they understand that figure. And we don't drive a car every day, we take a bike every day, so that's money that we're not paying every week. They enjoy the adventure of getting up in the morning, the adventure of like riding by the park and seeing people. And these little funny moments that will happen where we'll run into a friend or we'll see somebody that we know and just being able to be like, oh my gosh, there's our friend, hey. You don't get that when you're in a car, you don't get that when you're on the bus.
I asked if he could give us a peek into what he does in the day-to-day, so he brought us to his office.
This is sweet.
And so this is secure down here.
Awesome.
One of my new favorite features about any building is does it have like the bike storage? My wife and I both have space here, so let me see if she's here. Yeah, she's down here. Hey! Hi. Hey. This is my partner, Cass.
Hi there.
Hi. Nice to meet you.
We're a two-person operation. An international organization. We support kids in schools all over the world.
And our goal is really to transform the ways in which school operates to be really wonderful for all people.
Like actually one of the things I just learned recently that I'm dyslexic. I got a bachelor's degree in computer science and I kind of fumbled my way through it, but you know, the reality is that like I struggled a lot in school. And I realized in hindsight that like I acted out a lot in school, partly because the system didn't work for me.
Yeah.
And I look in hindsight and I'm like, my learning style didn't work with the learning style that was presented to me. What I've learned from that experience is like to focus on my strengths as opposed to like trying to get better with my weaknesses that I'm not necessarily gonna like improve at this point.
So you were lucky enough to get that in your 30s, but like what happens when a kid gets that when they're 7 and they understand that like, oh, I can do this cool and I can do this, and then I can think in this creative and abstract way to understand their strengths and like all of the cool things that they can do because of how their mind works.
Then he took us up to see his space.
And so this is me. You all can come in. I do a ton of book-related things. That's like the heart of a lot of the work that I do is like books for children. Almost 90% of my work that's kid-facing is about books. I approach books in a lot of different ways, and so like I use puppets, I use storytelling to like engage kids in the imaginative world. So I also write in here. So like I've written 3 books. This is my latest book. All my books are about teaching kids.
You know, it's like, yeah, you're a superhero in dad clothes, as you self-described.
Exactly. And that was what I was going for, like the aesthetic. So this was very much written about education, but the aesthetic was very much a superhero aesthetic. One of the things that I've been working on with kids is I don't assign any books. I let kids choose. What are you into? Like, what do you want to learn about? Like, what makes you feel curious? Because there's things that I can teach you in any text. And so a lot of like the props and things that you see in here are all things that I use as tools to get kids into books.
What actually inspired you to even take that first step? I guess you said you had always been into bikes and stuff like that, but the idea of actually like carrying the kids on the bikes.
I think for me, it was the pandemic. We're not entirely sure how safe the subway is. We own a car, but we don't want to drive the car every day. We drove the car for 3 days to try to take the kids to school. All 3 days we got a ticket. So we're like, oh, it's just going to cost us $170 a day to drive the kids to school, all right, plus gas, plus maintenance. And so we weren't willing to do that. And so after the first 3 days of school, that's when we went down to the shop. The selling point for us was it was a sunny day. Bashir rode us around the Navy Yard, and our kids were squealing. And I would hope that that's how every parent makes their decision. They think about what's sustainable for the earth, what makes sense for me logistically, but then also what makes my kids happy. And so I was just like, you know what? I'm willing to be a little cold on winter mornings because my kids like laugh on the back of the bike. This pandemic was really hard for kids. They were separated from their friends. My daughters would be like visibly upset because you can't go to your friend's house for a play date anymore. You can't go for a sleepover anymore. You can't go out for pizza anymore. And so having them squeal on the back of the bike was like an opportunity for them to have something that they didn't have, you know, and that was huge.
It's inspiring to me to see that experience that you're having with them and to see, you know, their experience in that regard, or to learn more about it.
I'm really inspired by the way he thinks, and it's really great to learn about how he's helping others. I like to think that I'm helping others through my business in these videos, but I really get inspired when I hear of others and how they're helping others. I kind of think that's part of our purpose in life, but I don't know. I could be wrong.
Representing the underdog, if you will. Bikers like yourself are kind of the underdog. How do you think we can be better represented or you know, kind of help in that way? In some ways, kind of being part of the legislative process. I guess perhaps in some ways it's like being able to have like a well-structured argument and say like, hey, listen, this is the appropriate way, you know, like this just makes sense, and make it something that would be difficult for somebody to say like, oh, no, we're not doing that.
I'm a dad and I want my kids to understand
in a community, you can't pay for everything, you can't get everything you want, but there are people whose job it is to help you.
Right.
And in a democracy, that person is a council person. When we first started riding bikes around and wanting to be out more, I took my youngest daughter to go meet our council person because I thought that was really important. We have ideas about like what we want the playgrounds to be like in our neighborhood. There's somebody whose job it is to like do that. But she was really shy. And I was like, no, like this is the person that you tell the ideas to because this person decides how the government spends the money. For biking, it's the same. You know, I think we can be involved in the legislative process. It's a lot of what you're doing, storytelling. You arrive at understanding by making these human connections, right? This dad that we ran into in the park this weekend hadn't considered a cargo bike until he saw my family at the park with the cargo bike. And so immediately I start telling him, like, yeah, we go out, we do this. And I'm like, dude, you want to ride? And so after about 15 minutes, this guy's like, yo, I'm
in.
Yeah, right. I'm in, you know, and so it's a lot of those kinds of connections. Yeah. But the real connection was story. Like, he needed to meet another dad who was already doing it. It's that idea of like, that's sharing, it's community.
Yeah. I guess that gets back to that point about education though, right? Because everybody learns in a different way. And I guess to perhaps on some level, like early adopters, like they might in a lot of ways generally be people that learn differently and be more abstract thinkers and be able to think outside the box and be able to even live outside the box in some ways. And, you know, in this case, a several thousand-pound steel box that most of us, you know, live within. But
and so I think it's that idea of possibility, that there are so many times where we're told to think about what's accessible, but not necessarily about what's possible. And that's what I want for children, that's what I want for my own family, that's what I want for our community, is just like to really think about, let's not be stuck in what is. We're given imaginations, and the thing that separates us from other mammals is that we can think and critically solve problems. So we don't have to live in what's been given to us, we can really live in like what's possible.
I'm really thankful for people like Cornelius for exploring the possibilities of the bike and allowing it to become more accessible to others. I'm reminded that every small movement we take has the power to move others. I can really appreciate those that are choosing to move differently. It's not easy, but I know from experience it's really fulfilling. So to all of you out there that are choosing a different path to make it easier for those finding their way through the unknown, thank you. You're helping us connect with each other on a more human scale, and I strongly believe that a more connected community is a healthier one.